Hi everyone, this is Brian Hayes and welcome to episode 10 of the Music Mind podcast. Today my special guest is Steve Dawson. Originally from Canada, Steve has been based in Music City, Nashville, Tennessee in the USA for the past 10 years or more. A 25-year plus professional musician, in our conversation today we get to touch on a wide range of topics relating to the creative life. Please enjoy with me my conversation with Steve Dawson.
Since I was 17, I've been living on my own, trying to bite what I had learned now that I'm all alone. You let a bird in the house, you know bad luck will soon begin. And there's a bad omen scratching at the door, and I just let it in. At the store one day as he came stealing in, blew hard out of the ashes, nearly jumped out of my skin, and perched high upon the rafter, eyeing me as I began to run. And there's a bad omen scratching at the door, and I just let it in. Well, he lurched slow and stared at me as he slipped across the room. I didn't bother now to hide up high as he crowed and preened and plumed. He ate the daylight in the room, his feathers all shone as black as sin. And there's a bad omen scratching at the door, and I just let it in.
Well, hi, Steve, and welcome to the Music Mind podcast. Fantastic to have you here today as my special guest for episode 10 in the series.
All right. That's a good round number. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Our audience have just saw and heard your great performance of a tune called, or a song called Bad Omen. Fantastic band, really good feel, great quality recording, great quality video. Can you tell us about that song? Like, first of all, the composing of that song. Tell us the story behind Bad Omen.
Well, it was kind of done in a couple of parts, I guess. And so I was playing in a band with Allison Russell, who I'm sure many people over there have heard of, called Birds of Chicago. And so I was in that band for a few years, and we did a ton of touring. I've actually known Allie for 20 some odd years, because she's from Vancouver as well, which is where I'm from. In any case, when I was out with the Birds of Chicago, we were performing as a trio, and so our sound checks would often just be me messing around on stage, I guess. I had a lot of time up there, and so I would just like mess around and come up with stuff. And so I had like a library on my phone of just voice memos of things that I was playing around with, and one of those was the riff to that song, and I had a progression in mind, and the whole thing was kind of like put together with a few lines here and there and sort of a concept of the lyrics. And then So I had that, and those were just sitting there on my phone. And then when COVID happened, that band came to a crashing halt. We were in the middle of a tour actually, and then went home. And then a couple months into it, I started talking to my friend Matt Patershuk, who's a wonderful songwriter up in northern Alberta in Canada. I live in Nashville, but in any case, I've produced records for him, and I think he's one of the great songwriters in the country from Canada right now. And we started talking about writing some stuff together, and neither of us really wanted to try and do it in real time. So we started kind of swapping ideas and swapping files and swapping lyrics and swapping ideas for lyrics, whatever. And that was one of them. So I bundled that up with some ideas, and he sent me some words that he came up with, and I combined them with some of the words that I had, and that's how we wrote that song. So it was kind of piecemeal, and it was co-written, but it was, yeah, we were like never even remotely in the same room together.
Interesting.
And,
yeah.
That's
And so when you say, so co-written both the music and the lyrics, or was your partner basically helping you with the lyrics of that song?
Just the lyrics. Yeah, I was writing them pretty much across the board. The way that we collaborated on a lot of music over COVID was I was writing the music, the melodies, the chord progressions, and he was writing the bulk of the lyrics. Not all of them, but the bulk of them. Yeah.
Okay. And isn't that I suppose that's a great outcome of COVID, if you could say there was a great outcome, is so many musicians around the world have formed new collaborations and new ways of recording music and writing music. And I think you're a great example, because when you listen to that song, you don't know who's wrote it. You don't even know whether it's an original song or someone else's song. One of the things that interested me is, like you, I'm a multi-instrumentalist, and I have a great love for the slide instruments. What's it like accompanying yourself on that particular song? I mean, it's very common for people to strum a 6-string guitar, and whether it's, Bob Dylan or James Taylor, whoever they're influenced by. But it's a bit rarer for someone to accompany themselves on a slide instrument when they are also doing the lead vocals. What does it feel like? Can you just talk a little bit about, is there a difference? In this case, I think you're on the Weissenborn slide there.
Yeah.
Is there a difference to backing yourself up on that type of instrument when you're singing?
Not to me. I've always just thought of it as the same kind of thing. I mean, some of the people that I was really influenced by early on were people like Ry Cooder and David Lindley, who were doing that kind of thing all the time. And Lindley in particular, was doing it on the Weissenborn, and Ben Harper was another one that was, especially his earlier stuff, was all done, on the Weissenborn and singing. And yeah, I just think of it as a guitar that you have to, like a guitar, you have to get it to the point where you're not really thinking about it.
Yes.
And as long as you can get to that point where, the picking that I'm doing, like really when I think about what I'm doing on the Weissenborn while I'm singing, is like trying to first get to that level where I don't have to think about it, and I can just do the thing that I'm doing on the Weissenborn and make it work with the song.
Yes.
But then I'm also trying to like get to the next level of trying to actually be creative with it as well, and like be more syncopated and leave things out and just try things that aren't just the straight up pattern of whatever the song happens to be.
You did a fantastic job of doing just that on that track. I also have to compliment the band. It's a great feel there. There's the space in the music is just fantastic. No one's in a hurry to fill in the gaps, and I think that's the real magic in music, is the silence. What happens in those moments. But was that a touring band, or was that just a group of friends that you got together for that recording?
Are you talking about the album recording or the video?
The live in the studio recording.
Right. That's a bunch of guys. So that's Dennis Crouch on bass. He's in Robert Plant's band now, Robert Plant and Alison Krauss. He is phenomenal, and he's incredible, that guy. There's a reason why he gets a lot of gigs, and it's because he's really good. And he has a massive pocket. I mean, that word is kind of annoying, but it basically means that field that he's playing there affords somebody like me a great deal of space to maneuver around inside of it.
Yes.
And his tone is spectacular. And so, yeah, it's him and a guy named Justin Amaral on the drums, who I've played with a lot around town, but we've never really we've toured a little bit actually, but not a ton. Um, and then Jen Gunderman plays the keyboards, the organ stuff. So it's a completely different crew than was the crew that played on the album version was scattered around like Vancouver, and the drummer was in Los Angeles. And so, yeah, when it came time to doing a live thing, that was actually done like sort of late, like COVID was still a thing. And so we had, we were all masked up until right before we played. And there was some apprehension about all that because nobody had really done a lot of stuff yet.
Yes.
That's, yeah, when we did that. And that was done at a studio in Nashville called The Studio Nashville. And it was just a cool, that was a thing like with COVID, they'd sort of upped their game of their video content. They had like a 4 or 5 camera setup, whatever it is, there in the studio. I wanted to do it without any sound reinforcement, so I didn't like. I was playing the Weissenborn. I think I was playing it through an amp, but the amp was like 25 feet away, and I couldn't hear the amp. But I think the bass player and the drummer could hear it very slightly.
Okay.
But like the drummer has to play super quiet to be able to play with me in that situation. And I like that. That's what I wanted, but it kind of handcuffs him in a way. So he's a real sport about it.
He played beautifully. The sound on the drums and as I say, the sensitivity of those musicians. It sounded like these guys have played together for 20 years as a team, but it was interesting that not so much in that case, just great musicianship.
Yeah, I've never like done a thing like that. That was just a one-off.
Just back on the Weissenborn, a lot of people who watch this podcast may be seeing that instrument for the first time. I'm aware of it. I've never actually played one of those instruments. How would you describe it to someone who is absolutely new to the Weissenborn concept? What is it? Is it an acoustic lap steel? How would you describe it?
Yeah, it's an acoustic lap steel. Its distinguishing feature is that it has a hollow neck all the way up to the headstock. So unlike a dobro, which is a solid slab of wood up to the headstock, this is a resonant chamber of sound. And the result is that it's a very deep, rich sound. And it was originally meant for Hawaiian music, but it failed miserably because it wasn't very loud. And you'd think with that chamber in the neck that it would project more than it does, but it's actually a pretty quiet instrument. So the failures of the Weissenborn are what led the brothers that invented the National tricone, which is the original metal-bodied guitar, to come up with their invention. They were like, they wanted the Weissenborn to do something that it couldn't do, and so their solution was to come up with the National, which eventually evolved into the dobro.
So it was really a volume thing driven by lack of volume, essentially.
Lack of volume, yeah. Like a National tricone is like 5 times louder than a Weissenborn. Yeah, it's just the nature of the instrument.
Beautiful sounding instrument. We're going to listen to an original instrumental where you feature sort of solo on the Weissenborn. They're called Bug Scuffle, which is a great name and a great tune. What tuning are you using in this track? What open tuning are you using for Bug Scuffle? Do you remember?
No.
Well, what's some of your standard? What do you muck around with on the Weissenborn? What's your go-to tuning, I suppose?
My guess. The other issue that I have is I have I have a lot of instrumentals, and I don't necessarily remember the names of them.
Well, you'll enjoy it when you watch this podcast.
Yeah, very well. Bug Scuffle is, I'm pretty sure it's in a C tuning. That
it sounds like a low C tuning. Yes.
Yeah. So I guess I sort of like, I probably picked that up maybe from Ben Harper, maybe, but I can't think of him actually playing that same tuning. And David Lindley sort of messed with it a little bit, but again, it wasn't his main thing. And then I heard Leo Kottke use it.
Okay.
But it's my main tuning on the Weissenborn and quite frequently on the guitar. And so what it is from low to high. Weissenborn's a 6-string, just like a guitar.
Yes.
So it goes C, G, C, G, C, D.
Okay. You got a ninth up the top there. The D up the top. Yeah.
And so what you've got there is, like Bug Scuffle, if it's what I think it is, then it's kind of a major sounding tonality with a bit of blues in there.
Yes.
And Bad Omen that you played first is in the same tuning, but it's decidedly minor sounding. And
Yes.
that's the cool thing about that tuning is you can flip between a major tonality and a minor tonality really easily because there's no third at all that define, like normally the third is the thing that defines, you know, if you're in an open D tuning on the guitar, you're kind of handcuffed a little bit as to like the tonality of the tuning is very major. So this tuning does not have that problem.
Let's have a listen to it now. This is a great recording, and you really get to hear the beauty of the instrument because it's just solo. It's just you. Okay, Steve, Love Bug Scuffle. Now, that's an original composition of yours, but it's an instrumental, quite different to Bad Omen. Can you talk us through your approach to composing an instrumental tune as opposed to either collaborating and working with a lyricist on a vocal thing? What are you thinking of when you are composing an instrumental tune?
I'm probably not thinking about much. I'm probably noodling around on the guitar is usually how it'll start if it's an instrumental guitar piece. And sometimes I sit down and like concoct an entire piece all at once based around a melody or a chord progression. Melodies are important to me, and I think that gets overlooked a lot in modern guitar music. There's a lot of technique involved and not always a ton of melodic content or something.
Agree. Yeah.
I kind of, that's like my thing is like I want there to be a melody that's memorable and that's fun and interesting for me to play and to get out of the instrument in some way. So yeah, I mean, in a case like that song, I have no recollection of how it came together, but probably like that record, I kind of sat down to write a batch of tunes for that record, and there's that album has probably 12 songs on it or something, and they were all written. Some of them have a string quartet on them, so some of them were written with the string quartet in mind, and then others were written as a solo guitar piece.
Yes. So when you're physically playing the instrument, so one thing is composing the tune, getting that melody in your mind, and of course, as you're playing, how rehearsed is it? Or do you let yourself just go off center of, you might have worked on the tune, you've got the melody, you've got the basic format of the tune, but when you're in the moment playing that, whether you're recording it or performing it, do you give yourself quite a bit of liberty to watch what happens, just to let yourself go wherever it takes you? Or what's your approach there?
Yeah, it's like 65 to 70%. I know exactly what is going to happen, and then the rest is improvised. So, um, yeah, there's structure. I think of them as songs. So I think of there being a verse. I think of there being a chorus. I think of a different part being a bridge if there is a different part. So I think of song structure in that way, and then after that, I just kind of let her go, let her rip in a way. But I mean, I practice the song enough. That's the tricky thing with instrumentals is like, you know, remembering how how they're different from one another and the things that make them unique in whatever way they're unique. Those are important features of that song, but you don't want to get hung up playing the same thing all the time or it would get really boring. So
Yeah.
I mean, that version that you just played is different from the album version by probably 30% or so, because
Yes.
30% that is just improvised, but the structure is intact.
One final question there. In a song that has lyrics, there's a definite story. You know, someone who's listening to Bad Omen, they might interpret those words a little differently than you intended when you wrote them, but there is a clear story. When you are playing an instrumental song, is there a defined, a very clear story in your mind that you want to convey, allowing for the improvisation, or is it a different thing? Is it different every time in your mind, or is there a story you want to send out there when you're playing an instrumental?
I guess there's some that have a specific story. Some of them have a story behind them. You know, like if I'm performing, I might tell a story that is consistent from night to night about the song. But usually, if I do something like that, it's pretty abstract, and it still doesn't really tie the piece of music down to being one thing one night that it is the night after, you know?
Yeah.
So, um,
But
yeah,
it's
I mean,
interesting, isn't it? Yeah. I think that's the fun of instrumental music, that it really does mean something different to probably every person, where if you listen to a vocal song, it may, the message of Hound Dog by Elvis Presley is pretty basic and lame. Most people understand what the message is. They might have a different twist on it. But I think when you hear a piece of instrumental music, maybe if you had 10 people, maybe it touches them differently, each of
oh yeah,
those 10 people, which I think is a wonderful, powerful thing of instrumental music.
as I'm performing it, if I'm on tour and performing the same piece of music night after night, if it's an instrumental one, if it's a lyric one, then yeah, like I'm thinking about the lyrics. But if it's an instrumental one, yeah, it could be wildly different what's going through my brain each night, and that would affect the improvisational part of the tune, I'm sure, in some way. I've never really like thought
Or
too
too
hard
much
about
about
that
it.
stuff.
No. Okay, I want to take you right back now. You've obviously been, how long have you been involved in music, you'd say, at a serious level? How many years roughly?
Um, what year is it?
It's 2023 here in Australia, at any rate.
25 years. 25 years.
25 years. That's a fair while. I want to
Yeah.
take you right back to when you were just just starting out. What's your earliest recollection of being interested in music itself? Maybe not playing an instrument, perhaps it's one and the same event. But when you think back, when do you first recall just having that excitement about music?
When I was pretty little, my family wasn't particularly musical at all, but we had a couple records, and those records really were impactful on me. I think they were probably my aunt's, because my aunt was into like rock music and stuff, and
Okay.
so I think she'd left them at our house. But the ones that really stuck out to me and have really probably informed my musical taste in a lot of ways, and I still love all of these records, are, so there was the Magical Mystery Tour by the Beatles.
Oh, yeah.
It's still my favorite Beatles record.
Yeah.
And it's like nobody likes that record, but I love it. I think it's the
Mm.
best Beatles. Uh, then the Rolling Stones' "Sticky Fingers," which is
Yes.
still
Yep.
me. That's my favorite Stones record still.
Mm.
And Long John Baldry, "It Ain't Easy," which not as many people know about, but Baldry was a seminal figure in British blues in the '60s, and him along with Alexis Corner kind of developed that whole scene where Mick Jagger came from, and Elton John came out of all those guys. In fact, Elton John, the John of Elton John, because that's not his name. His name's Reginald Dwight, but the
Yes.
John of Elton John comes from Long John Baldry.
Ah,
So
okay.
yeah, so there's this great record called "It Ain't Easy," and half of it's produced by Elton John, and the other half's produced by Ronnie Wood and from the
Wow.
Stones,
Yeah.
and a killer record. And so anyway, Baldry ended up in Vancouver for the better part of his life, and I ended up playing with him in his band. I wasn't like his regular guy, but anytime he would do an acoustic show, I would play Weissenborn or dobro or acoustic guitar with him or whatever. And I just couldn't believe it, because that record to me was like, and
Mm.
still is like an incredible sounding record.
Mm.
And there I was getting to play all those tunes with him, and
Wow.
he was
Yeah.
a huge, physically huge, but also like emotionally in my in my life. Like I grew up listening to him.
What was your first instrument? What instrument did you play first?
The recorder.
The record,
Yes.
and rapidly moved away from that, obviously. But what was the
Yeah.
sequence of events post the recorder?
I wanted to play the guitar, but I didn't really know how to express that. And so my parents got me like a nylon string guitar probably when I was eight or nine, and probably some lessons somewhere with somebody that was playing like classical guitar or something. And it
Yeah.
just didn't really, it wasn't what I had in mind, but I didn't know what I had in mind. I guess what I had in mind is that I wanted to play like the Rolling Stones, and somehow that the
Yes.
classical guitar didn't cut the mustard. But I didn't even know what an electric guitar was.
Mm.
And so yeah, I mean, guitar was early on. I played clarinet in school. That's how I learned to read music, which I still value as a pretty important thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then I got, so I kind of left the guitar probably when I was 10, and got back into it when I was probably 14. And then when I got back into it, then I knew what was going on. I got an electric guitar. Like I knew what I wanted to do at that point, and I started to figure out how to try and do it.
So let's move forward, because I want to play a beautiful track of yours called Lily's Resistor, which you play on the pedal steel guitar, which is an instrument that I absolutely love. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, because one of your guests on your podcast, Mr. Lloyd Green, was an enormous influence to me over here in Australia. I first heard Lloyd playing on the Monkees TV show, but didn't realize it was Lloyd playing Listen to the Band. And my brother and I both thought that, what fantastic guitar playing there's. Geez, we'd love to be able to play guitar like that sound on Listen to the Band. Many years later, we both learned that actually that was Lloyd Green playing pedal steel, and we did the sound. We had no idea, because sitting here in Australia on the other side of the world in an era when there was no YouTube and no video, and, you just didn't see anyone play a pedal steel guitar, yet we were sort of hearing it. Now,
Right.
interestingly, you look to me like you're playing a 10-string steel. Are you playing the normal E9th Nashville tuning, or what tuning are you using?
Yeah, like an E9. Yeah.
Yeah. The interesting thing I notice on your videos is you actually play the pedal steel with a thumb pick, but no finger picks. Is that something you do selectively for different songs, or is that how you play the pedal steel?
That's how I play the pedal steel, yeah. But I started playing pedal steel with picks like everybody else.
Yes.
And then maybe 3 years ago, I kept using them. And then maybe 3 years ago, I suddenly was like, why do you need picks on the pedal steel? I couldn't figure out why I was doing it, or why it's such a common. In fact, it's like 99% of people use finger picks.
Absolutely.
And I can't quite understand why. Like And there's one other guy that I know. His name's Russ Paul, and he's in town here.
Yes.
And he's probably the most recorded steel player in modern
Mm.
times. He doesn't use picks either. And when I saw him, I was like, yeah, I figured I was right. Like, you don't have to use them. I use them when I play dobro and stuff, because you
Yes.
kind of need to like project that instrument with the volume that the picks give you. But with the pedal steel, you don't have that issue. In fact, I always find the pedal steel projects too much and it sends too much signal. So I was looking for ways to like rein that in and send a quieter signal. And a big thing for me was just ditching the finger pick.
I was actually quite surprised when I saw your video, because the sound of your steel, there was nothing that made me think, oh, I wish he had a bit more teeth in his playing, So I think that's a really important lesson for people, that you need to engage with an instrument however it best feels to you, rather than necessarily thinking that everyone plays with finger picks, so I have to. Lily's Resistor, what's behind the name of that?
Well, that is so the other slightly unusual thing that I do on the pedal steel, I guess, is that I play through old tube amps pretty much exclusively. I don't really use, like, the standard thing around here is like a PV Classic or Session 50 or whatever.
Yes.
But I like kind of crunchy little tube amps, and so I have my favorite one for my steel is a Fender Tweed Deluxe from 1953. And so in the Fender factory in the 50s, there was a group of women that did all the soldering and all the assembling of the amps. And one of the most famous ones, like they're kind of revered now because they were so good at what they did. So it was Lily and Lupe were the two women that did a lot of this assembling and soldering, and they made these masterpieces of amplifiers. And
what a lovely trip. So you're calling that song after one of them.
So the resistor part is just, like a resistor is a thing inside the amp. And the cool thing about those amps, if they're in good shape, and mine is like in really good shape, if you open up the amp and you pull the chassis out, you can see their work, but they also sign their name. So Lily made my amp, and she put a piece of masking tape on the chassis of the amp and signed her name, Lily. And so if you have a Lily or a Lupe, and I have a Lily.
Fantastic. Let's have a listen to. I love this track, and that backstory just makes it all the more beautiful, I think, to watch and listen. Lily's Resistor. Okay, Steve. So beautiful pedal steel playing there. You're based in Nashville now. So originally from Canada.
Yeah.
Why Nashville? I guess there might be an obvious answer, but why the move to Nashville?
Well, it's sort of obvious and sort of not obvious, I guess. But I mean, I had worked and played a lot in Canada and Vancouver my whole life and my whole career, I guess. And I'd done a lot, and I was seeing Vancouver go through a lot of changes. It was becoming a lot more expensive. A lot of people were moving out of the city. A lot of the venues that I knew and loved were shutting down, and I felt kind of shut out in that city a little bit. And I felt musically that I had very little to sink my teeth into. I had really good old friends that I still play with to this day, but I felt like the things that I had felt attached to about Vancouver were basically gone, and I wasn't feeling like what I had to offer was really what was happening in that,
Okay.
in that
Yeah.
city. So
Yeah.
we just decided to move, and we thought about moving to Toronto, which is the sort of the center of musical activity in Canada.
Mhm.
Especially if you ask somebody from Toronto where that would be, they would say Toronto.
It's
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
but to me, that like I'd worked in Toronto a lot and I'd recorded in Toronto a lot, and I just felt like that would be more of the same kind of thing. And so we just decided to go somewhere where we didn't know anyone, and that happened to be Nashville. I came down here with my wife and we checked it out, and we really liked the city and thought it was cool, and it was cheap at the time. It's not cheap anymore, but it used to be.
Mm.
Um, so there was a lot, we could get a lot of bang for our buck down here. And I don't know, just a lot of things pulled me to this city. It just felt electric here as opposed to somewhere that was like used to be great
Yeah.
and
So they
wasn't.
call it Music City. Is it, does it feel like Music City? Like when you're walking around, does it feel like music's the number one thing in Nashville, or is that just a charade out there?
I actually it does. No, it's true. Like it's a real thing. I mean, it depends on where you're walking,
Yeah.
honestly. Like if you go
Yeah.
downtown, it's it's chaos downtown.
Wow.
It's craziest, ridiculous scene anywhere in the world. It's like a bunch of bachelorette parties going
Oh,
crazy.
wow.
And
Okay.
that's the scene.
Okay.
But as soon as you get away from that, there's all kinds of like over where I am, I'm in East Nashville, and it's like this is where all kinds of stuff is going on. There's tons of little studios. There's a bunch of great venues within walking distance of my house. There's a bunch of great bars and restaurants, and there's music at all kinds of places. And people are playing, and the caliber is super high. And um, yeah, I mean, I don't know any other city where music is as much of a thing. And of course, there is the touristy element to it, and then there's the actual element. And then, the history here is phenomenal. And a lot of that stuff is intact. The RCA Studio A and B are still here. The Quonset Hut, which is where a ton of
Mm.
interesting work was done, it's been taken over. It's owned by Belmont University now, but it's still there. The
Yes.
studio is there. Ocean Way is here. There's all kinds. Sound Emporium, where T-Bone Burnett does all his great recordings and stuff.
Mm.
They're all here, and everyone loves coming here. And in a way, like the music industry moved away from Los Angeles a few years ago, and a lot of stuff is still made in LA, but for the most part, it feels like in America, LA is like more of a film town now, and film music and
Mm.
TV and stuff like that. And Nashville is like where people still make records. And yeah, there's a lot of that like new country stuff. I don't really get involved in that. I don't think
Mm.
about new country, and new country doesn't think about me. So
No,
we don't
no,
really
no.
we don't have any issues between the two of us,
Yeah.
but uh that's definitely a thing, and that's a small club. There's very few people. There's like two steel players, there's like five guitar players, and there's like five drummers, and they do everything.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's a very small club,
So
and no,
how long have you been in Nashville now?
10 years.
So if you go back, what was it like? I suppose, and I don't know whether the right word's breaking into the scene, but like you're a newcomer coming into Music City 10 years ago. What was that like? What was it like to either barge your way in or tap your way gently on the doors? What was that whole process for you?
A lot of it was like going to things, going to events and seeing who the people were that were doing things that I thought were interesting. And then, in some cases like hiring them, or in some cases finding out where they were playing and hanging out and getting to know them. And so, those were people to me like Fats Kaplan and Jim Hoke, and some of these players that people may not know their names right away, but they've been here for a long time and they've been part of the music scene, and the McCrary sisters and people like that. And so they're all people that I started to work with and got to know. But I didn't come here when I was 20. Like if I'd come here when I was 20, it would be a whole different ball of wax. Like I came here when I was almost 40, and I wasn't looking to get into like a country band. I wasn't looking to become a pop star. I wasn't looking to write hits with other writers. I was already doing things. I was making records and producing records and
Yes.
playing sessions, and that just continued. So I never stopped doing any of that. So I wasn't in a stage of my life where I was going out every night. Like I had a kid too that was
Yeah.
3, 4 or something at the time,
Mm.
and so I wasn't going out every night. Whereas if I was here when I was 20, it would have been a completely different situation.
That's a really good point, I think, because a lot of the people and some of those great interviews you've done, like Charlie McCoy and that, those guys were very young when they moved, and they were wanting to be the rock star or whatever. Charlie tells that great story of auditioning for Chet Atkins with his Les Paul. Had he brought his harmonica, Chet would have had about 20 projects he could have gave him. I thought that was a lovely story. But so as far as making a living in Nashville, because a lot of people who watch this podcast and listen to it are younger musicians. There may be a lot of people, in that late school years, and they love music and they play it on the weekend in a band. But the sound of Nashville and that music career, that lucrative career in Music City, what's the reality of making a decent living in Nashville if you're not a superstar, if you're not backing one of the superstars? What's the absolute reality of it?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to make a living here. Like it's hard to answer that question in a way because some people come here and they want to be a guitar player for a country band, and you can do that. Like you just have to like get some hours under your belt and get to know people. 90% of it is like knowing people. So that's the biggest part for sure.
Yeah.
Like not being a jerk and knowing a bunch of people. And sooner or later your phone starts ringing because they hung out with you and you were cool,
Yes.
And then if you can play, even better. But if you can't even play all that well, you can still get a gig, So the issue here is like, I don't know. I mean, so some people just all they do is play on Broadway. So Broadway is that part of downtown that I was talking about where it's just like party central.
Ratbag Center. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's like 30 bars in a row, and they each have 3 levels. And so there's at any given time from like noon till 3 a.m, there's almost 100 bands playing. And there's a lot of work down there, and some people make a good living doing that. But once they start doing that, that's what they do, and like they don't leave because they'll go and they'll play in 5 different places in one night. And so you can make good money doing that. A lot of it's tip based. The pay is crap, but the tips can be good. Yes. So that's one way of doing it. Another way is like sessions, and again, you kind of just have to know people. Like it's not the kind of thing where even if you're amazing, it's going to take a few years to break through and get some of those gigs. And believe me, there is no shortage of great players down here. I didn't come here thinking I was going to like redefine the guitar or anything because that would be ridiculous.
Well, the history of that town and the players, is just mind-boggling. Yeah.
And if you come here and you see it, it's even more mind-boggling. Like it's crazy how good some of these people are, and some of them are like 21 years old.
Yes.
And they're like, I mean, look at Trey Hensley or Molly Tuttle, or they're still in their 20s, those people, and they're just like, they're so good. Nobody was that good when I was that age. Like honestly, like it's kind of a new thing. I don't even know where it comes from. In any case, so then there's like artists like that, that are like just phenomenal talents and they can do their thing. And then there's people like me who can back people up. And I do a combination, but I also produce records. So my living is based on producing records, playing sessions, backing people up. Right before COVID, I was on the road a lot with Alison Russell in her band.
Yes.
We were gone. That was 100 plus dates a year we were doing. So that was a lot of work. I was gone most of the time for 2.5 years, I guess. And then I was also playing with another guy named Matt Anderson, a Canadian artist. And I was sort of juggling those two gigs. And that's how I made a living really for like 3 years, was touring with those two artists.
So your success, and something I wanted to mention on your website, I stopped counting at 10 at the list of very different roles you do, whether it's a record producer, a songwriter, a touring artist, a session guy, a studio owner. You very much are a versatile operator. And from your point of view, is that a key to your success, that you haven't got all your eggs in one basket, or can it be a negative too, I suppose?
No. I think it's essential. Like, unless you're somebody like Trey Hensley or whatever, like somebody that's just like so good, there's no way around the fact that Trey is going to be playing bluegrass guitar when he's 90, but for me, like, I didn't have that. Like, for me, it was, I'm going to engineer some records. I'm going to produce some records. I'm going to play a bunch of crazy guitars. I'm going to get as good as I can on certain things, but like, I have to keep practicing other things, and I have to also like learn how to engineer and mix records really well.
Yes.
So like, I think if one of those things had ever like really taken off for me, then I probably would have just done that.
Went down that route. Yeah. Okay.
But that never happened. Like, I never had that experience. So it was like somebody would call me and say, hey, can you produce a record? And I'd never produced a record. This is a long time ago. Now,
but you said yes, no doubt.
Yeah. And,
exactly.
And,
can
you mix a record?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've watched people mix records.
Yes.
That's how I started mixing records. And now I've been doing it for 15 years and I know how to do it.
Yeah.
I'm still learning, but, and then, with the Weissenborn, I've been playing the Weissenborn for 25 years almost. So like, I have a thing, like I have my own way of playing it, and I'm really comfortable doing that. Sometimes it works with other people. Sometimes it's better for me to just do it on my own. And
I'd like to let our audience hear a little bit more of your playing, because I think you're a great player. You've got your own personality. You don't fall into the trap of showing the world what you're not good at. I think you hit it on before. A lot of people are just so technique driven, but there's always someone who's going to play faster, louder, and higher than you. And what I like is you don't go there, yet you've got a wonderful control of the technique you need to play how you want to play. And you may not remember this, but you have got a tune called Lighthouse Avenue, which you play on the fretted National guitar. I'm assuming it's a National. It's a beautiful looking guitar, but you also use the finger slide, which is a lovely combination of the ability of, the sound of the National guitar, the true ability to play a fretted guitar, with that wonderful bonus of being able to add in the slide technique. And what I love in this song is you don't overdo any of it. So what do you remember? Do you remember this one? Lighthouse Avenue? Again, it's just
I do, actually. I know this one.
Okay, you know this one. Can you tell us a little bit about it? What's the genesis of this song? How did this come about?
Well, I mean, I don't really know how the writing came about necessarily, but it's like, it's done with a combination of fingers and slide, and the way that you get those things working together can be really intriguing to me. And so, this is like a very lyrical song that sounds simple, but it's actually pretty hard to play, I guess.
Oh, I love it. Let's have a listen to it now. I'm sure our audience will really enjoy this Lighthouse Avenue. Okay, Steve, fantastic. Great guitar playing there, your own individual style. One of my prior guests was fantastic musician, London-based nowadays, Robin A. Smith, fantastic piano player, conducts the London Symphony Orchestra and what have you. And one of his frustrations in today's climate is as a composer, he writes a lot of his own music, sort of modern classical music, but when you listen to it, it's just beautiful. You know, it's not like Beethoven or Bach, but he really struggles as a composer to get people interested in his works. And a comment he made in the podcast that I'll never forget is he said, if Burt Bacharach was starting his career, and Burt passed away recently, but was starting his career now in music as a songwriter, he would be a plumber. He simply could not do what he did. And that really struck me when he said it. But after the thing, I thought, you know, he's sort of right. Like Burt's estate as purely as a songwriter, I see in the news, was valued at about $170 million US. Not a bad way to make a living as writing songs for other people. But his point was very much nowadays with the whole thing being streaming and whatever. Now you write a lot of your own music and you make it available via various means on your website, download, purchase, download, or streaming, or what have you. Mm-hmm. What's the reality? Because a lot of people dream of being, they think of the Burt Bacharachs and the, Dion Warrens and that, and those people have made amassed fortunes writing songs for other people. What do you see in Nashville there? I mean, does it remain in any way a viable career option to be a quote unquote songwriter?
For certain people, yes, it does. But that's getting smaller. Like, it used to be a thing here where you could come to Nashville and get signed to a publishing deal and make a living that way, and you didn't have to write hits. You had to try and write hits and hopefully write hits, but you didn't have to write hits. And I know a lot of people that came here in the 90s and that was their thing. And year after year, they would just re-up that deal and they'd get another advance and they would have to come up with X number of songs a month, and okay. As long as they fulfilled their part of the bargain, then they were good. And that's a thing that has sort of gone away. And so it still exists here, but the money is terrible and it's barely worth anybody's time anymore. There's still publishing money to be had. And that's what where songwriters make their money is on the publishing part of things. But to do that and only that, and to hope that that will become a prosperous career is a really big long shot these days.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's changed so much.
It's not impossible, but it's extremely unlikely.
Yes,
I would say. And
I think that's good advice. I think there are still people out there who may not be that good individually as players or singers, but believe they're writing the next, number one worldwide smash hit, and maybe they are, and good on them. But I think your advice there is, or your messaging is good. I want to talk about Hen House Studios. Tell me a little bit about how did that come about, and what exactly is it? Is it a home studio? Tell us about your studio project.
Yeah, it's like a glorified home studio, but it's a good size, and I make full records here with full bands, up to, I had 6 people in here the other day. So I'm in the control room right now. This is the upstairs, and downstairs is the tracking area, and it works really well. So it's basically a project studio in the sense that it's not a commercial studio. I don't run a commercial studio. It's that would be, it's not the era of the commercial studio. Maybe in Nashville, like definitely some people do it, but the the studios that do it here that succeed at it are like they're in so deep with like huge amounts of gear and
Millions of dollars in
millions of
investment.
dollars.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's a place here called Blackbird that like,
Mm.
you know, if you're looking for a Neumann U47, which is like the holy grail of mics, not only do they have 20, but they have serial numbers 1 through 20. So it's like
Oh
you
my goodness me.
you can't
Yeah.
compete
No.
with that,
Yeah.
obviously. So I have developed a studio that suits my needs and that I can get great drum sounds and great guitar sounds and great bass sounds and great vocal sounds and all those things. And I don't have any extra stuff. I just have like a good amount of things, and I have a nice API console, and I'm very comfortable working on all this equipment. And I've invested a lot of my money in
Yes.
it over the years, but I haven't overextended myself to the point where I'm like
No.
drowning in debt for it either. Like
No.
I owe money on the studio itself, the building of it, but
Mm.
I'll pay it off eventually, you know, and
Mm.
that's fine. The equipment, I own everything, and you know, it's been a gradual process. I didn't go out and buy all this stuff like last week. I've been buying it for 25 years. So
So in Nashville, and because Nashville was founded on the Music Row just being a series of houses, is the local authorities, are they quite I don't know what to say here, but running a business from home, is it seen in Nashville as that's okay, or is it frowned a little bit on every second house being a commercial studio in its own way?
well, it's funny you should ask that because that is a hot topic here right now. Um,
Okay.
Somebody's estimated the number of studios here, and it's a lot. But my friend Lidge, who has a podcast himself about recording, his name's Lidge Shaw, and
Right.
he sued the city of Nashville because up until last year, it was illegal to have a studio in Nashville,
Ah.
in your house. And that dates back to the either the 50s or the 60s, and I'm pretty sure it was the major labels that were here, and they owned all the studios on Music Row. You know, RCA had a studio, and whatever, all the labels owned the studios, and they didn't want competition, and they didn't want independent people building stuff in their houses, so they passed a law that that you know, it wasn't just studios, it was like hairdressers, and like
Yes.
nobody could run a business in their house until last year. And then Lidge sued the city because the city shut him down because he had a neighbor that complained, and
Okay.
the city came in, made him stop, and he sued them, and he won.
And he won.
And
Okay.
the city has now said it is legal to have a studio in Nashville. So I was breaking the law here for 8 years, and now I'm not. So, but really, you know, it comes down to your neighbors, really.
Complaints.
Like
Comes down to
really
complaints.
complain,
Yeah.
you're going to run into trouble. If you're cool and you don't cause problems, then
so if you're not tracking at 3 a.m. in the morning, you're probably going to be okay. But if you push the envelope,
I mean,
yeah.
it would be easy enough to get on somebody's bad side and
Yes.
it just have it not work out.
Mm.
But I think that's kind of the same anywhere. But it was just kind of funny and ironic that in Nashville it was illegal to have a home studio,
Of all
especially
places, yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
in this day and age where
Oh,
those major labels are basically long gone, and you know
yes.
the studios are still being used, but like for the most part, most people are operating out of a home studio now.
Yes. Are you a bit of a one-stop shop? Are you the engineer, the producer, in some part a player on those projects? What's a typical project in your henhouse studio?
I almost always play. Like I like to play. That's where
Yeah.
I'm the most engaged. I don't sit back and just listen. I'm part of the process. So yeah, I mean, for me, I almost always play multiple instruments.
Yeah.
And then my job is to bring in the right people for the project, depending on what it is. You know, if it's an instrumental thing, then that's one thing. If it's a blues thing, that's one thing. If it's a singer-songwriter, then they can count on me to be, like a one-stop shop. And in here, I am the engineer, but I have an assistant usually who's here because I can't do everything at the same time.
No.
Even though I sort of can. I engineered a thing earlier today, and you know, I have a remote control setup, so I
Yes.
can do it.
Yes.
people show up, they set up, I get the sounds, I set up my stuff, I get my sounds, and then I run the thing from the remote control, and it
Great.
works pretty good. So yeah, I can do a 6-person band in here with no help, but
Yes.
a little chaotic. So I
Yeah.
like to have I like to have an assistant here to help with that side of things. But that's all it takes. And then I mix almost everything that I produce. I end up mixing it because it's the most affordable. Like, it's the best way for people to work, is to not have to farm that out. Because as soon as you're
Oh.
hiring people, it gets more expensive. So I can
Mm.
price the project for the whole thing. So you
Yes.
can watch. So,
Mm.
and I don't go over budget. So what I say it's going to cost is what it's going to cost, and that's going to vary depending on how long we take and how many other musicians we have to
Mm.
hire and all that stuff. But I can guarantee that I'm not going to be hiring some mix guy who's going to go way over budget, because it's
No.
me.
So I think on your website or somewhere, have you done over 100 projects, or like CDs or albums, or for other people? What sort of numbers have you done in your studio?
I've produced over 100 records. Yeah. I've played on probably 300 or 400, something like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't keep
But I
track
mean, that's
anymore.
significant. That's significant. That's a great output. What do you think is happening with most of those 100 albums that you've done for other clients? What do they do with them?
I don't know.
Don't know. Don't care, really. It's
Well,
they've
I mean,
asked for a product and you've given
to a
it to them.
certain
Yeah.
extent, that's not my
No,
problem, right?
no.
But I mean, what does anyone do with a record
Yeah.
anymore? I don't know. Like, I think 8 of them have won Juno Awards, which are, it's like the Canadian Grammy Award.
Okay.
I played on Grammy Award-winning records, so I mean, there are projects that do really well, and then there's projects that I think should do really well, and they don't do really well.
No.
But it's not because the music is crappy. The music's awesome,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
just for whatever reason, or the person doesn't do it full time, or the person tries really hard and it just doesn't work. There's no way to predict what's going to connect and what's not.
No.
Uh,
And I guess
but
that's one of the great things about being in the studio and the producing role is you're doing your best for the client, but then it's more or less it's up to the client to go
Yeah.
and plant that seed with whatever. We're coming down the home straight. I want to play 2 more songs of yours. Me being a Steel fan, I loved a track you did called Phantom Threshold, which had the steel running through some effects and put the steel in a different role. Do you remember this one, Phantom Threshold?
Oh yeah.
Tell us about this one. This is a great track.
Well, this whole record, Phantom Threshold, so this song that you're going to play is a live performance with it's kind of my live band. So it's the band that you're seeing on the video is me on steel, Joachim Cooter, who's Ry Cooter's son, is playing drums, and then
Okay.
kind of my Vancouver crew, which is Jeremy Holmes on bass, Liam McDonald plays percussion. There's 2 keyboard players I play with a lot, a guy named Chris Jester and a guy named Daryl Havers. They're both playing keyboards.
Yes.
So for videos, I just kind of went full board and got like everyone from Vancouver that I had ever played with to play
Wow.
on some of these tunes,
Yes.
plus Joaquin, and then so that's what we did, and we spent 3 days in there, and we did 15 videos, so it was really productive and great. And so we weren't producing a record because all those songs had been recorded before, so we were doing
Okay.
a new version of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what it is. And so this song came from, so yeah, like when the COVID thing happened and I was writing songs with that Matt Patershek guy, I also opened up a whole can of worms with these sketches, basically, I had of pedal steel music that I'd been writing and working on, but I'd never finished. And so suddenly I was like, wow, I'm working on all this music. Maybe I should work on these pedal steel things as well. And so I started finishing these unfinished bits and sending files away to Jay Belleros is the drummer, and he's the guy that plays on all T-Bone Burnett stuff. And then Jeremy Holmes plays all the bass, and then Chris Jestrin plays all the keys, and then a few people play, Fats Kaplan plays a couple things, and a couple other people play a few things, but for the most part, it's me and Jay and Jeremy and Chris. And it was all done remotely. And I would write the tune, I would sketch it out, send it to Jay. He'd play the drums, and then we'd go from there. And then usually Jeremy would add bass, and then I would start layering stuff. And then at some point I'd get the keyboards involved, but that was much later. So it was not the way I worked prior to COVID, but during COVID, that's how people worked, and that's how I worked.
Yes. But the video we're about to see is all of you guys together playing live in a studio. Again, the feel is fantastic. The space, the sounds on the instruments, just the overall musicianship is just sky high. And I've got to congratulate you on that. And for our audience, and I'll put it throughout your website, stevedawson.ca for Canada. If people want to check the full versions of these, purchase the music, I think the best place is to go to your website. Is that the best place for people to go?
Yeah, I mean, they can, you can stream all this stuff on Spotify and Apple Music, which is how most people do it these days. But at my website, I have vinyl and CDs of this stuff. The version that you're hearing on the video is not the album version. That's a live version.
No.
The album is for the most part similar, but definitely not exactly the same. But it's the tunes are basically the same.
Really, really good music. Let's have a listen to Phantom Threshold. I actually came across you first through a fantastic podcast you host called Music Makers and Soul Shakers. Now, I'm seldom jealous of people, but you've interviewed one of my absolute heroes, Lloyd Green, and his mate, Charlie McCoy. What was it like as a steel player sitting across from Lloyd Green and spending an hour chatting to Mr. Green? What's your recollection of what that felt like?
Well, he's very personable, and Lloyd's an interesting cat, man. Like I just saw him this morning at the coffee shop. Like he's around, he's still playing great. Like he's in fine form. He has this thing that I've noticed that I've brought up with other people, and nobody else seems to share this thought about him, is that he doesn't seem to think people are that interested in what he does. And I don't know where that comes from. Because
can you tell him there's someone in Australia who is very interested in what he does?
Yeah. So I went and saw him. He did a show with his band, which is ironically called the Lloyd Green Trio, but there's 4 people in the band. So
okay, yeah.
In any case, the Lloyd Green Trio played, and what it consisted, and it was fantastic. Don't get me wrong, but what it was like he would tell the story of a session, like say Divorce by Tammy Wynette. Yeah. He'd talk about the session, and then he would play, or he'd count it in, play like the signature bit. So the
riff,
so maybe
whatever.
Yeah, maybe it's 8 bars, and then he'd stop, and that was the end of it. And then he'd start talking. So it wasn't even like a minute; it was like 23 seconds of music.
Oh wow! Okay, yeah.
And the whole night was like that, and man, those stories were just killer and just like amazing, right? Yeah. But for whatever reason, he just seems to think that like that's all people want to hear of him. Whereas like I would just like to hear him play for 3.5 hours.
Look, I can share my Lloyd Green story with you. I was 15 years old here in Australia, regional country town. Bought my first pedal steel, which was a Emmons push-pull 10-string. At that time, Lloyd's at the height of his career. The Monument Records, even here in regional Australia, you'd go to the record shop and there'd be a Henry Mancini record in the front, and right beside that would be Lloyd Green, Shades of Steel. Like he was right up there due to the Monument distribution and that. So I wrote a letter. This is, in these days, you actually wrote letters and put a stamp on it and sent it, airmail, to Mr. Lloyd Green, care of whatever. 2 months later, and as a 15-year-old, asked him way too many questions. I just shudder. I'm sweating now thinking, dude, you are writing to, at the time, the highest profile pedal steel player in the world. Did you need to ask him what picks he uses and what's bar he uses and all these things? Do you know I've still got it. I got a beautiful handwritten letter back from Lloyd, and he answered every single question in phenomenal detail, signed it, your friend Lloyd Green, keep in touch. Here's my home address. It's sort of like you get like getting Les Paul's home address or Chet Atkins' home address. It's and me being me, I'd write him back and ask him something. And I've got about 3 letters there. And I to this day, if someone sends me an email asking me a question, my Lloyd Green moment comes, if it was good enough for Lloyd Green, it's good enough for you, Brian, to actually answer those questions. And it came across in your interview with him. The one takeout I took was, and we touched on it earlier today, when Lloyd come to Nashville, he said in your interview, he was as good a steel player as anyone else, and he thought he was going to take the place by storm. He got that first session and thought, hello, I'm in. And 6 years later, he got his second session. I thought at the time, hello,
he was selling shoes downtown. He was
selling shoes,
Yeah, man.
And I thought that was great. The other one who I had a little bit of contact with in a similar thing was Charlie McCoy. And have you read Charlie's autobiography? His 50 cents and a box top?
I haven't.
Well worth a read. I bought a copy of it over here direct from Charlie, and I won't retell the story. The highlight for me is Charlie retells a story of a session with Leonard Cohen. It is worth 10 times the price of the book. It's very humorous, and Charlie goes into quite a lot of detail about what it was like doing a session with the late Leonard Cohen there. And the other one I thoroughly enjoyed was Duane Eddy. Like, you sort of had trouble getting away from Duane. He shared so much with you. What's your memory of talking to Duane? Like, there's one of the legends of music.
Well, Most of those I don't do a lot of editing really, but Dwayne I had to like chop it down because he was at my place for like 4.5 hours, and yeah, like I couldn't shut the guy up, you know?
But it was such stuff to hear too, wasn't it? It was all
Right.
really
Oh yeah.
relevant.
That's what I do it for. Is like it's a hobby for me. Like I don't make any money doing the
No,
podcast.
no.
I it's like there's a bunch of expenses and stuff. So I
Mm,
get I get support from I have sponsors and I have people that listen that send me money and stuff
mm.
um, to keep it going. And but it's just a hobby, and at the end of the day, I'm just super interested to talk to these people about what they did and like
Oh,
about what the techniques were and what kind of guitars they were playing and what was going through their mind when they walked in and Chet Atkins was sitting there. And those are that to me is like it doesn't get any better than that.
oh,
And
and I love the fact. Take it from me that on the other side of the world, it's very much appreciated because your interview with Lloyd Green is the best one out there.
oh
And
wow.
the fact that you took the time to do that and that Lloyd took the time to do it and you've shared that with the world, to me, it's just priceless.
Oh,
It's probably the greatest thing you could ever do for other people who are interested in those things. I'm so pleased to hear that Lloyd's still walking around having a cup of coffee, which is
oh yeah.
great. Okay, Steve, is there anything? What are you currently working on? Is there anything you'd like to tell the audience? Projects coming up, or anything that you'd just like to share with the audience that you're currently focusing on?
Well, I've been really busy the last few months. I recorded a record for a band called Flatback that's really great instrumental music. We made a really fun record here a couple weeks ago for Matt Pattershuk, who's the guy I've been co-writing with. He came to town, and it was me and Matt, my friend Jeremy on bass, Jay Bellaros on drums, who's I don't know how he finds the time, but he's out with Robert Plant these days. But he came and did this session, and Tim O'Brien, who's like a legend of roots music, and so that was the band, and it was just really inspiring to make music with those people. It was amazing. So that record is done, but I haven't mixed it yet. But it's very cool and unusual,
Yeah,
um, very textural and rhythmic and rootsy, but also like kind of different in some way. I don't even know yet. And he's just a phenomenal writer. He doesn't write songs like anybody else that I've ever heard.
right.
I mean, those are the two that I've got going right now. And then I'm working with a band called the Matinee from Canada. We finished a record recently, and they're putting it out very soon, and it's a really cool record. I'm doing some more work with them. I'm going on tour with my band in April, and we're gonna play 10 shows or something like that.
That's
And then
a Canadian tour, is it? In Canada, or where are you going?
mostly in Canada, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And a little bit in the States, but yeah, I don't have any interest in like slogging out 3-month tours or anything really anymore.
No.
Uh, but I do like to get back to Canada and play, and I play around here. And I also have a really fun band that it's sort of a band, I guess. It's me and Fats Kaplan, who he was in John Prine's band, and he was in Jack White's band, and he was in a band called the Dead Reckoners with Kieran Kane and Kevin Welch. And he's a very talented multi-instrumentalist. And then so it's me and him and a guy named Dave Jakes, who was John Prine's bass player for 25 years. And we have a band called the Volcano Brothers, and
No.
all we
Yeah.
play is three
Yeah.
three World War II Hawaiian music. So
Ah,
and only in Nashville. So that's
great.
yeah.
Now, I
Uh,
also notice on your website that you do offer some lessons on your various instruments if someone wanted to connect with you
yeah.
from anywhere in the world, because you do play some, as I said, the Weissenborn guitar is quite rare. I know it's been around, but it's not that many people are seen playing it. Pedal steel's hard to get tuition. Paul Franklin's doing a great job on his site, but it's still not an easy instrument to connect with. So obviously, if people hear the way you play, like what you do, they can just reach out to you and get some tuition online or in person if they're in Nashville.
Yeah, I teach. I wouldn't say regularly, but every now and again, I teach. I do some guitar camp kind of things in the summer usually. I used to teach for a living. Like I taught guitar for, that was how I made my living for
Yes.
3 years. So I feel like I can do it, but I'm a little rusty, I guess.
I
But
think, yeah, yeah.
I do a few, 3 or 4 a month usually. Kind
Well,
of
I think
depends.
if people watch and listen to the way you play, you've got your own style. As I said, you're not trying to be anyone else. You're not trying to be the greatest technician on your instruments, but you make really good music, really good, natural sounding, genuine music. And I think that's the world desperately needs more players who are doing that rather than out there competing for whatever number one spot is. Okay,
Yeah.
Steve, if I always ask my guests this, I think it's a good reflection. If you travel back in time to when you first started out 25 years ago, when you first started out seriously thinking about playing music, not the recorder, but when you'd moved beyond the recorder and the clarinet, if you could time travel back and talk to young Steve and give your younger self your best piece of advice, firstly about music, what do you think you'd say to young Steve with everything you've done, all the experiences, all the different directions you've gone? What would you say to that young little guy just starting out on his journey in music?
I don't know. I guess just to like stick stick with the hard parts, which are like, getting those first 10,000 hours in, you know, uh, that's the part where I think a lot of people get discouraged, or they get impatient, or they want to, just become a famous pop star or whatever the problem is with some people. But getting, for me, that wasn't really a problem because all I cared about was guitar. That's all I did for quite a few years. And but yeah, I mean, I remember that feeling of feeling impatient, or like this is never gonna work out, or I should quit while I'm ahead and do something else. I think that those early stages of just like where it's just seems like an endless mountain of work to just get to that first plateau. Those are the times when I probably could have used some more encouragement, either from myself or from other people. And that's something I've come to learn through the podcast too, is like a lot of people that do really cool, original sounding things had somebody in their life like really egging them on to do that thing. And that's why they kept at it. Whether it's somebody like Bill Frisell or somebody like Lloyd Green or whoever, there kind of has to be somebody somewhere telling you like, yeah, it's okay to do this. It's
That's
gonna.
great. Great advice, I think. Really, really great advice. You're at that same moment, you're back in time, you've just spoke about music. What about life? What would you tell young Steve as your best bit of advice in just dealing with life? You've lived it. What's your best bit of advice? Thinking back, what would you tell young Steve?
Well, don't rush anything. Take your time. Get good at things. Um, don't do gigs for the money. That's a big one. There's things. My only regrets in my professional life are doing things that I I did because I had to do them, like to make a living, and musically I didn't get anything out of them. If something doesn't tick one of those boxes of like being musically inspiring or personally inspiring, or you can get a lot out of things in different ways. It doesn't have to be the most amazing musician or the most amazing singer, but it has to like bring something to the table, whether it's a great personality that will rub off on you in some way, or whether maybe they're a great songwriter but not a very good singer, or maybe they're a great guitar player and a great singer but they're a jerk. But I can roll with that. Like
Look, I
I
think
can do
that's
that stuff. But
I
I
think that's great advice, because I know I totally agree with you. In my life, the biggest frustrations, if I think back on my life, uh, was doing things for the money, because I thought I had to do it for the money. And it's so easy to kill your love for music when you try and link music with money.
like those are some of the only times where I'm like jealous of somebody, is when they're playing music and they don't rely on it for a living. I'm like, that's awesome.
It's been a real thrill talking to you. We've covered so many different aspects of music. I think we've only scratched the surface of what you are involved in, and it's been great that you've shared all of those experiences. Thank you for being part of the podcast.
Oh, thanks for asking me. I really appreciate it. It's been good to talk to you about all that stuff.
Thanks.
It's the biggest mystery, you see. Some things you just can't understand. So as you draw the cards, try to trace the path of Mars, and it is truly slipping through your hands. And I was young, I was true and strong. Tried to do things just the way I'd said. Now it seems I can't trust myself, neither can nobody else. So I'm lying here alone in my own bed. Now time has made a fool out of me. Time has made a fool out of me. I used to watch the hours slip by, days faded into dust, and now I see that time has made a fool out of me.
How fantastic was it to be able to spend some time today talking with a musician living in one of the world's major music cities, a pro player, a session player, a composer, a multi-instrumentalist, a touring and performing musician, and a studio owner. Make no mistake, Steve Dawson is the real deal. When I asked Steve following the conversation if he would like to send over a video for a collaboration as per the normal process with the podcast, Steve said sure, but he was flat out for a week with prior session and recording work. A good indication of someone living the professional musician life to the fullest. I'm happy to say we have recorded a collaboration video, and we've called the instrumental tune exactly that, collaboration. It features Steve playing some wonderful Weissenborn guitar, and I'm supporting him on the slide dobro. Until next time, bye for now.